Okay, let's dive in. We're exploring a really specific corner of the aerospace world today.
Hmm.
Aeronautic low temperature solenoid valves. Sounds technical, maybe even a bit obscure.
It does sound niche, yeah.
Yeah.
But these are absolutely vital components. Think fluid and gas control fuels, coolants, that kind of thing.
Right.
And they have to work perfectly in really extreme cold. So reliability is everything, completely safety critical.
And we're basing this on some interesting material, an Outlook report from Cognitive Market Research.
That's the one. It gives us a really good window into this market.
So the report gives us a global picture. It says the market was worth about, what, $217.2 million back in 2021?
Yeah, that was the baseline. But what's
Okay.
interesting is the forecast.
Yes, the growth.
Right. It's projected to hit $260 million fairly soon by 2025.
Okay.
And then looking further out towards 2033, the number jumps quite a bit, $372.6 million.
Wow. Okay, so that's a definite upward curve over the next, decade or so.
Definitely.
The report actually puts a number on that growth, a compound annual growth rate, the CAGR, of 4.6% for that longer stretch.
Which, might not sound like a headline-grabbing number initially.
Right.
But for a highly specialized, safety-focused component like this, that's actually pretty robust growth.
It really is telling, isn't it? So the big question is, where's this growth happening? And what's pushing it?
Exactly. And that's where the report gets quite detailed. This is the real deep dive part for you listening in.
Okay, so let's start with the established regions. The source says North America is currently the biggest market.
Yeah, largest share. Back in 2021, it was valued at $83.8 million
And projected to grow too.
to about $130.8 million by 2033.
Okay, so solid growth there. What's the CAGR for North America?
The report puts it at 3.7%.
Yeah.
Solid, like you said.
And Europe, another big player, I assume?
Yep, significant market. It was $63.6 million in 2021, expected to reach $105.1 million.
Oh.
That's a slightly higher CAGR, actually 4.3%. So, good, stable growth in those traditional aerospace centers.
I sense there's a but coming. Where's the real dynamism?
Well, yeah. While North America and Europe are growing steadily, the report really shines a light on Asia-Pacific. That's where the momentum is.
Ah, okay. How so?
It started smaller, $47.6 million in 2021, but it's projected to nearly double.
Double?
Almost, hitting $96.1 million by 2033. And that means a TKR of 6%.
6%. Okay, that is noticeably higher than the others.
Absolutely. It's the highest regional CAGR in the report. Clearly indicates where a lot of the new aerospace activity is focused.
Does the report break it down further? Which countries in Asia-Pacific?
It does. It specifically calls out India. Get this. India has the highest individual country CAGR predicted.
Really? What is it?
A very impressive 8.1%.
Wow.
And China's obviously a huge factor too, projected to be a $45.1 million market just on its own by 2033. Australia also shows strong growth, around 7.2%.
So India, China, Australia, that really suggests a major expansion or maybe modernization push in those areas.
That seems to be the implication, yeah. Building out fleets, maybe aerospace manufacturing too. The report also mentions Latin America briefly.
Oh, yeah.
Brazil showing decent growth, 5.5% CAGR. And some steady, if smaller, progress in the Middle East and Africa, with Egypt leading there.
Okay, so we have this picture. Established markets growing okay, but Asia-Pacific, particularly certain countries, really accelerating. What does the source say is, driving this demand overall for these specific low-temp valves?
It points to a few key things, primarily just the simple fact that global aircraft production is increasing.
Right, more planes, more parts. Makes sense.
Exactly. More aircraft being built just fundamentally increases demand for all the components, including these critical valves.
And I guess the safety aspect plays a big role, too.
Huge. There's a constant growing emphasis on safety across the entire industry. So, components known for high reliability, especially in tough conditions like extreme cold.
They become more sought after.
Precisely. Demand goes up for things you can absolutely count on. Plus, modern aircraft designs are always pushing performance limits.
Meaning the components need to keep up.
Right. They need parts that offer precise fluid and gas control in more complex systems and under increasingly tough, low-temperature requirements.
So if we kind of zoom out, the health and the growth pattern of this very specialized, safety-critical market, it feels like a bit of a barometer, doesn't it?
I think that's a great way to put it. It reflects the confidence and the direction of the wider global aerospace sector. especially its expansion into new regions.
Which leads to a really interesting question for you, the listener, to mull over.
hmm What is this strong growth, and especially the regional shifts we're seeing in this very niche, very safety-focused component market?
Mm.
What does that really signal about the future priorities, maybe even the future power balance of the global aerospace industry over the next decade or so? Where's the real action heading?
All right, welcome. Ready to skip the noise because we're diving deep into the source material you sent over.
Exactly. Think of us as your guides today.
We're here to sift through it all, pull out those key insights, maybe some surprising facts too.
That's the plan. Our mission is to help you quickly get a handle on what really matters in these documents. And today, well, we have two pretty different areas to cover.
We do. You've given us material on, first, this really specific niche in the aerospace industry advancements market dynamics,
And second,
and second, something much broader, the huge impact of recent trade policies, specifically tariffs.
This audio was created with podcastle.ai.
Impact of recent trade policies, specifically tariffs on electronics and electricals.
yeah, on the surface, they seem miles apart.
Mm-hmm.
One is, tiny components and extreme cold.
Right.
The other is massive global economic shifts.
Right.
But as we unpack this from your sources, you'll really see how these forces, market dynamics, tech changes, global economics, they connect. They ripple out.
Absolutely. This deep dive, it's tailored for you using your sources to get straight to the heart of it. So let's get started. Where should we begin? Maybe aerospace.
Sounds good.
Okay, so your sources zoom in on something I hadn't thought much about. Aeronautic low-temperature solenoid valves. Super specialized, it sounds like.
It is very specialized.
And apparently, even with all the technical challenges, it's actually a growing market.
It is seeing, notable growth. And the sources point to a few key reasons why. Probably the biggest driver, increasing demand from military and space applications.
Okay, that makes sense. Defense, space exploration.
Exactly. As governments and private companies, too, push boundaries there, they just need components that work reliably in extreme cold. Think high altitude, think space.
Right. Failure isn't really an option.
Not at all. It's vital. And that ties into another driver, just general advancements in aerospace tech.
How so?
Well, new propulsion systems, for instance,
Uh-huh.
especially with the growing interest in cryogenic fuels like liquid hydrogen
Ah, okay.
and aircraft designed for higher, colder altitudes. All these need very specialized parts, like these valves, for control, efficiency, and, basic safety in really harsh conditions. Precision is key.
So extreme environments plus new technology equals demand. What else?
Commercial side, too. Specifically, flights in really cold regions.
Like Arctic routes.
Exactly. More flights over the Arctic, more high-altitude routes means more planes needing parts that won't fail when the temperature drops way down. Safety and efficiency again.
That makes perfect sense. But, okay, drivers are strong, but there must be challenges, right? Headwinds. What's holding this market back, according to the sources?
The biggest one mentioned is cost. Just plain high cost.
Oh.
Making valves that work reliably at, say, cryogenic temperatures, it needs really advanced materials, complex designs. That specialized manufacturing just pushes the price up a lot.
Right. Cutting edge usually isn't cheap.
And that can be a real barrier, especially if you need a lot of them or if budgets are tight.
Okay, cost is number one. Anything else?
Oh, yeah. Regulations, certification.
Always a big one in aerospace.
Absolutely. The safety standards are incredibly strict, as they should be. But getting these highly technical valves certified takes a huge amount of time, money, testing, documentation, all of it.
I can imagine.
It can definitely slow things down, slows down innovation getting to market.
Yeah. The hurdles must be immense for space or even just commercial flights.
They are. And then there's a more practical issue with older planes.
Okay.
The sources mention there's not much retrofitting happening. Putting these advanced low-temp valves into older aircraft,
Probably not easy.
it's often not compatible, or it requires really complex, expensive modifications. For a lot of operators with existing fleets, upgrading just isn't worth it, or maybe not even feasible. So that limits growth in that whole segment.
Okay, so strong push from new frontiers and tech, but real friction from cost, complex rules, and just the difficulty of upgrading old stuff. So given all that, how are companies adapting? What are the big trends the sources see?
This is where it gets pretty interesting, actually. One major trend is integrating these valves with intelligent aircraft systems.
Making them smart valves.
Kind of, yeah.
Yeah.
Modern planes have more sensors, more electronics for monitoring, for predictive maintenance.
Right.
So connecting the valves allows for, early warnings if something might be going wrong. It helps reduce downtime, makes the whole system more reliable, safer.
Yeah.
It's part of that move to more intelligent flight control.
So the valve itself starts feeding data back into the system.
Oh,
Cool.
exactly. Another big trend is tied directly to sustainability in aviation,
Okay.
that rising interest in cryogenic fuels, liquid hydrogen mainly.
Right. You mentioned that driving demand.
Well, those fuels need incredibly low temperatures for storage and operation, cryogenic levels, so valves that can handle that safely and reliably. They're absolutely essential if we're moving towards those greener fuels.
Huh. Green fuels needing super cold tech. Interesting link.
It is. And finally, like a lot of aerospace components, there's a big push for miniaturization, making things smaller, lighter.
To save fuel, improve performance.
Precisely. So manufacturers are working hard to design valves that are more compact, weigh less, but still meet those extreme performance and reliability standards. It saves space, gives designers more flexibility too.
Okay, let me try and summarize this bit from the sources. The market for these special low-temp valves is growing because of space, military, flying in cold places, and new tech like cryofuels.
Right.
But it's held back because they're super expensive, hard to get certified, and difficult to put in older planes.
At least a good handle on the restraints, yeah.
And the future is about making them smarter, using them for greener fuels, and shrinking them down. Did I capture? Okay.
I think that sums up the key dynamics your sources laid out for this niche market really well.
Yeah.
It's definitely a mix of high-tech demand and some very real practical challenges.
Okay. So moving from that world of, extreme cold and precision engineering, your sources also talked about another kind of intense environment, the global marketplace, specifically with trade policies causing friction, especially for electronics.
Yeah, this really shifts gears, but it highlights how broad economic policies, like tariffs, can send these huge ripples through very specific complex industries.
Like the electronics and electrical sector?
Exactly. The sources focus quite a bit on the impact of tariffs introduced under the Trump administration. The stated goal was addressing trade imbalances, particularly with China.
And these weren't small changes, were they? The sources mentioned a wide range.
No, not small at all. They ranged quite a bit, maybe 10% on imports from allies like Australia, UK, but much higher elsewhere. Up to 46% on goods from Vietnam, around 34% average on Chinese imports.
Wow.
But the sources really single out the electronics sector as getting hit particularly hard. Tariffs on some Chinese electronic components, finished goods, it soared, as high as 145% in some cases.
145%.
Yes, for certain critical categories. The sources mentioned semiconductors, some consumer electronics. It's described as a direct result of that U.S.-China trade conflict.
That's not just a price increase. That fundamentally changes the economics of a supply chain. What specific items got hit hard, according to the sources?
They called out a 25% tariff specifically on semiconductors.
Yeah.
20% on lithium-ion batteries. And around 10-15% on common things like laptops, tablets.
Stuff people buy every day.
Right. And the direct consequence, as the sources describe it, is these tariff-driven cost increases pushed up production costs, which then pushed up retail prices. And that, the sources say, dampened consumer demand.
So manufacturers feel the pain, but it flows right through to the checkout counter.
Absolutely. And it spreads out. Think about home automation, communication gear, medical equipment, even industrial electronics. All these subsectors are dealing with higher component costs, delays, supply chain chaos as companies try to figure out this new tariff landscape.
That sounds like a huge chunk of the economy feeling the pinch. So how are companies responding? What are they doing to cope, based on what your sources say?
Well, a lot of them are fundamentally rethinking their supply chains.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.
What your sources say.
Well, a lot of them are fundamentally rethinking their supply chains. That's a major theme. Meaning actively shifting manufacturing or at least sourcing components to other countries, trying to get around the tariffs. India, Mexico, Vietnam come up as examples.
Diversifying away from China.
Trying to. And in some cases, they're even redesigning products, specifically changing the design to avoid using components that have those really high tariffs, which is, a big effort.
That sounds incredibly difficult, like trying to swap out engine parts mid-flight because the original one suddenly got way too expensive. Is it really that easy to just move manufacturing away from a hub like China?
No, not at all. And the sources are very clear on this. China is still absolutely critical. In 2023, the sources say they still exported $119 billion in electronics just to the U.S.
Still massive.
Huge. And here's the really tricky part. Even if you source components through Vietnam or Mexico, often the subcomponents, the bits inside those parts, they still rely on Chinese manufacturing.
Ah, so it's layered.
Deeply interconnected. It makes the whole tariff impact ripple even further. It's not easy to escape.
So moving to avoid Chinese tariffs might still expose you because their suppliers rely on China.
Wow. It sounds like trying to untangle a fishing net where every knot is connected.
That's a good way to put it. It's a significant challenge. U.S. electronics makers, who often run on pretty thin margins anyway,
Right.
they saw input costs jump dramatically. The sources mentioned figures like 18–25% increases. And to make it worse, the contract manufacturers in those other countries they're trying to shift to, they're reportedly facing capacity issues. They can't just instantly absorb all this new demand.
So, no easy fix. Given this mess, what tools or strategies are companies using? What do the sources say is helping them navigate?
One thing comes through really strongly in the sources, the crucial role of detailed market research. It's become almost a survival tool.
How so? What does it let them do?
It helps them identify new suppliers, maybe outside those traditional hubs. It lets them accurately analyze how costs are changing, optimize their bill of materials, the whole list of parts.
Right, the recipe for the product. Exactly. It helps forecast demand, which is unpredictable now, and track all the regulatory changes. Things like supplier mapping, actually visualizing the global supply chain.
Seeing where everything comes from.
Yeah, and scenario planning like, what if tariffs change again? And strategic product redesign. These are the kinds of tools that are central right now.
So using data and analysis to find pathways through the disruption.
Precisely. The sources point to big names, like Apple and Dell, as examples. Companies actively expanding production outside China, investing heavily in digital supply chain tech to build resilience, get more visibility into costs. The takeaway seems to be that firms using these research-driven, strategic, flexible approaches are the ones most likely to adapt and, well, succeed in this environment.
Okay, so the tariffs basically blew up costs and supply chains for electronics. Companies are scrambling, moving production, redesigning products, avoiding certain parts. And the key to surviving seems to be really good data, deep analysis, and being ready to change strategy fast.
That's a solid summary of the tariff impact picture painted by your sources.
So we've walked through these two distinct areas from your source material. On one hand, that very technical, specialized world of aerospace, low-temperature solenoid valves.
Right, that niche market.
And on the other, these broad, disruptive economic waves hitting the huge electronics sector because of trade tariffs.
And hopefully, you now have a clearer picture of the aerospace side.
Mm-hmm.
The specific drivers, military, space, cold regions, new tech.
Balanced against those restraints, the high costs, the tough regulations, the difficulty upgrading older planes.
Exactly. And the trends pushing forward. Smart systems, cryogenic fuels, making everything smaller and lighter.
And then for electronics and the tariffs, you've got the scale of it, those big tariff numbers, specific examples like semiconductors, batteries.
Yeah, the direct hit on supply chains, costs, and ultimately consumer demand.
Plus, how companies are responding, moving sourcing, redesigning products, and really leaning on market research and strategic planning just to navigate it all.
And what's interesting, when you pull back and look at both from your sources, whether it's a tiny valve for a rocket or the global electronics supply web, some common themes emerge, don't they?
Like what?
Well, the critical role of specialized, maybe even hidden components, the incredible complexity and sometimes fragility of global supply chains,
Definitely see that in both cases.
the constant need for innovation and adaptation to survive tough environments, whether that's physical cold or a volatile trade landscape, and maybe most fundamentally, the absolute necessity of deep market understanding and flexibility.
Our whole goal here was to take these complex topics directly from your sources and distill them down for you, cut through the noise, get you to the core insights.
Really clear, actionable knowledge.
Right.
So maybe a final thought to leave you with, looking slightly beyond the sources, but building on these themes.
Okay.
When you think about the intense, detailed requirements for something like that aerospace valve, it has to work flawlessly in extreme conditions. And you contrast that with the huge, almost chaotic disruption from something like tariffs hitting a vast industry like electronics. How might the pursuit of highly specialized, super reliable technology, really in any critical field, aerospace, medical, energy, how vulnerable or maybe how resilient is that pursuit to these big, unpredictable, global economic or political shifts.
That tension between needing perfect specialized tech and facing unpredictable global forces.
Exactly. What does that tension mean for future innovation? And how do we build supply chains that are genuinely resilient to both kinds of challenges? Something to ponder.
This audio was created with Podcastle.ai.